Dr. Obinna Okoro rubbed his tired eyes as he walked into the emergency ward, the hum of the flickering lights above doing little to soothe his exhaustion. Lagos nights were never quiet, but tonight the air felt heavier, almost as if it were holding its breath. He tried to focus on the patients on the stretchers, the steady beep of the monitors, the usual chaos of sirens and shouted instructions. Nothing, however, could prepare him for the storm that would break through the doors in the next moment. The emergency doors slammed open, and his world turned upside down. 3 stretchers were pushed in at once, carrying the people he loved most, his wife Ngozi, his brother Chima, and his only son Uchenna. All were unconscious, all were bleeding, all were broken. Obinna's hands trembled as he tore off his gloves, his heart hammering, his voice breaking into a scream that echoed across the ward. He fought to stay calm, to switch into the doctor's role, but memories clashed with the present. Ngozi's last phone call, cut off by screams. Chima, who had been avoiding him for weeks. Uchenna, who had stormed out of the house angry that very evening. Something about this accident did not feel right. And when a nurse whispered that the car hadn't skidded, that it was pushed, Obinna's mind raced. Police eyes darted nervously, and a blood-stained envelope in Chima's pocket sent chills down his spine. "We warned you," it read. Outside, black SUVs circled like predators, anonymous calls warned him to stay away from the truth. Obinna realized the night would demand everything from him, his skills, his courage, and his love for his family, and even that might not be enough. The emergency doors burst open with a deafening crash, and 3 stretchers slammed into the ward almost at the same time. Dr. Obinna Okoro froze, his heart stopping for a moment before pounding so hard he felt it in his throat. On the first stretcher lay Ngozi, his wife, her face pale, her body limp, a thin line of blood on her temple. On the second was Chima, his brother, skin ghostly under the harsh hospital lights, arms twisted unnaturally. And on the third, Uchenna, his son, barely breathing, his small chest rising and falling with the effort of life itself. Obinna's hands shook violently. He tore off his gloves in a blur, almost dropping the first aid tools he had been holding. His scream tore out of him before he could stop it, echoing across the ward and bouncing off the walls, a raw sound of fear, pain, and disbelief. Other doctors and nurses froze, some staring, some rushing forward, but Obinna could barely register them. His world had shrunk to the 3 bodies in front of him, each one a piece of his soul, broken and bleeding. Memories flashed in his mind like lightning. Ngozi had called him earlier that evening, her voice anxious, cut off suddenly by a scream that still haunted him. Chima had been avoiding him for weeks, brushing off messages, hanging up calls without explanation. And Uchenna had left the house furious, his anger still fresh in Obinna's mind. None of this added up. The crash that had brought them here didn't make sense, not with the chaos he saw, not with the injuries they bore. Yet he couldn't stop himself from trying to fight, to breathe, to save them. He placed his hands on Ngozi first, feeling for a pulse, praying, cursing, begging all at once. Chima's body was next, rigid and trembling with seizures, and Uchenna's soft groans barely reached his ears over the chaos of the monitors and alarms. Around him, the world blurred. Nurses whispered urgently, doctors barked instructions, machines beeped and screeched. Every second felt like a lifetime. But in the back of his mind, a whisper of doubt and fear grew louder. Something about this accident, this crash, this night, was not an accident at all. Someone wanted them like this. Someone wanted him to watch, helpless, as the people he loved most fought for their lives on these cold, sterile stretchers. And as he held them, trying desperately to keep panic from overwhelming him, Obinna understood that the night had only just begun, that the real danger was not outside in the dark streets, but already inside the walls of the hospital, creeping closer with every heartbeat. The monitors around Ngozi, Chima, and Uchenna beeped wildly, a harsh, terrifying rhythm that filled the small space of the emergency ward. Dr. Obinna Okoro's hands moved automatically, checking pulses, adjusting tubes, pressing on chests, injecting medications, trying to keep life clinging to the people he loved most. His mind, however, was a storm of fear, confusion, and memories he could not push away. He remembered the sound of Ngozi's voice on the phone just hours earlier, full of tension, then suddenly cut short by a scream that still echoed in his ears. He had tried to call back, but there was only silence. Why had she sounded so afraid? And Chima, his own brother, he had been distant for weeks, avoiding calls, brushing off messages, refusing to explain his absences. Something had changed in him, something Obinna couldn't yet understand. Uchenna, his only son, had stormed out of the house that evening, anger flashing in his eyes, his words sharp and bitter. The memory made Obinna's chest tighten with guilt and fear. He leaned over Ngozi, trying desperately to revive her, pressing, pushing, praying that the monitors would slow their frantic alarms, that her chest would rise, that she would open her eyes and tell him everything was okay. But every beep felt like a scream, every flatline like a knife twisting in his heart. He looked at Chima's trembling body, his eyes darting beneath closed lids, and then at Uchenna, whose small body was bleeding inside, fragile and vulnerable. The pain of helplessness pressed down on him, heavier than any exhaustion he had ever known. Something about this crash felt wrong, terribly wrong. The injuries, the timing, the fear in their eyes before they slipped into unconsciousness, all of it whispered that this was not an accident. Obinna's mind raced even as his hands worked. He scanned the ward, searching for answers in the chaos, in the frantic murmurs of nurses, in the concerned glances of the police officers waiting outside the room. His heart ached with suspicion and dread. Someone had planned this, someone had wanted to hurt his family, and now he had to act, but how could he act while the people he loved were slipping away in front of him? Each breath he drew felt heavy, each second longer than the last, every beep of the machines a reminder of what was at stake. He could not fail them, yet the truth, whatever it was, loomed like a shadow over the ward, dark and merciless. The night had become more than just a battle for life, it was a battle to uncover secrets, to face betrayal, and to survive a darkness that threatened to swallow not just his family, but the very world he thought he knew. As Obinna fought to keep his family alive, a nurse bent close to him, her voice barely audible over the alarms and chaos. "Doctor, their car didn't skid. It was pushed," she whispered, and the words hit him like a cold wave. He froze, his hands still on his wife's chest, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. Pushed. That meant someone had wanted this to happen, someone had planned it. The controlled chaos of the hospital seemed to shift, the air growing heavier, darker, filled with unspoken threats. The police standing near the doors exchanged nervous glances, their eyes darting to each other, to the stretchers, to the monitors. Obinna noticed how their hands trembled slightly as they checked their radios, their stiff posture betraying unease. He had always trusted the law to protect the innocent, but tonight something was wrong. Something dangerous was close, and it was connected to his family. Then a small, trembling movement drew his attention. Chima's jacket pocket, torn and blood-stained from the crash, revealed something sinister. Obinna fished the envelope out carefully, heart pounding. The paper was soaked with blood and partially crumpled, but the message was clear and terrifying: "We warned you." Only 3 words, yet they carried a weight heavier than any object he had ever held. Someone had sent a warning, and now he understood the real danger: this accident had been no accident at all. Obinna's thoughts raced as he looked at his brother's unconscious face. Why would anyone target them? What had Chima done, or known, that made him a target? And why was his wife in the car at the same time? Every memory of the evening, every small detail of the day, seemed to twist into a puzzle he didn't want to solve. The urgency of saving their lives collided with the growing terror of a conspiracy that reached beyond what he could imagine. Outside, the sounds of the city felt muted, the night pressing in on the hospital, as if even Lagos itself knew something terrible was unfolding. Obinna realized that the danger was not just the crash, not just the injuries, not just the race to keep them alive, it was the shadow of someone, or some group, powerful enough to plan, execute, and threaten him and his family. He felt a shiver run down his spine. This was bigger than him, bigger than any emergency he had ever faced. And yet, the responsibility fell on him alone, to save them, to uncover the truth, and to survive a night that had become more deadly and mysterious with every passing second. Obinna took a deep, shaky breath, forcing himself to focus. The monitors continued to scream, the alarms blared, and the life of his family rested entirely in his hands. But now, more than ever, he knew that someone was watching, waiting, and that the hospital walls might not be safe enough to keep them alive. Obinna's hands moved automatically, doing what he had done thousands of times before, yet nothing in his long career had prepared him for this. Monitors screamed alarms, and the bright lights of the emergency ward seemed to burn into his eyes, but he barely registered anything except the bodies in front of him. His wife, Ngozi, lay still, pale and fragile, her chest no longer rising. The flat line on the monitor was a merciless drumbeat of fear that made his stomach churn. Chima's body jerked violently in seizures, muscles stiff and uncontrollable, and Obinna's fingers shook as he tried to stabilize him. Uchenna, his son, had bruises and bleeding inside that no one could see at first glance, and every movement of his small body made Obinna feel like his heart was being squeezed. As a doctor, he knew the steps. He knew the procedures. He knew how to try to pull life back from the edge. But as a husband, a brother, a father, he was falling apart. Panic threatened to swallow him, yet he forced himself to breathe, to focus, to act. Each second mattered, each action could be the difference between life and death. But deeper than the fear, deeper than the urgent need to save them, a terrible thought clawed at him. Something about this accident, this night, this blood, was not natural. Someone had planned it. And if he succeeded in saving them, if he pulled them back from the brink, the truths hidden in the shadows, truths about betrayal, secrets, and dangerous people, would surface. They might destroy what little remained of his family. Obinna's mind raced. Should he act purely as a doctor and risk exposing them all, or hold back just enough to protect the secrets that could shield them? The lines between duty and blood blurred until they almost disappeared. Every decision weighed heavily. He wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but he couldn't. Not while his family's lives were in his hands. The monitors screamed their warnings, the alarms cut through the chaos, and he realized there was no safety in hesitation. Every choice carried a price, every move could be fatal. And yet, even as exhaustion threatened to overtake him, Obinna found a strange clarity. This was more than a medical emergency. It was a test of everything he was: skill, courage, and love. He had to push through, to keep them alive, to navigate a path that could protect them physically and, if he was lucky, shield them from the larger storm outside. Sweat ran down his face, his arms ached, his mind screamed for relief, but there was no relief tonight. Only decisions, only movement, only the fragile thread between life and death that he had to hold without letting go. Every beat of their hearts, every ragged breath, reminded him that he was trapped between duty and blood, and that how he acted now could shape everything that came after. Obinna had just managed to stabilize Chima's seizures and slow the bleeding in Uchenna's small body when something impossible happened. Uchenna's eyelids fluttered open. His tiny hand reached out weakly, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he gasped, "Dad. Uncle, betrayed you." Then, as quickly as he had woken, his eyes closed, and he sank back into unconsciousness. Obinna froze, the words echoing in his mind like a thunderclap. Betrayed? By Chima? His own brother? His hands shook as he touched Uchenna's face, trying to force the boy back awake, desperate for any more information. But the boy's breathing slowed, steady but fragile, leaving Obinna alone with a storm of questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. He looked at Chima lying on the stretcher, his brother's face pale and twitching from the sedatives and seizures. Could it be true? Was Chima involved in the trap that had almost killed all of them? Obinna's heart twisted painfully. Chima had been avoiding him for weeks, but he had never imagined betrayal of this scale. Memories of small odd behaviors, secretive phone calls, and distant glances now replayed in his mind, each one carrying a new, darker meaning. And then there was Ngozi, his wife. Why had she been in the car that night? Was it mere coincidence, or had she been drawn into whatever dangerous web Chima was tangled in? Obina's mind refused to stop racing. The ICU around him felt suffocating, the lights glaring, the monitors beeping in steady, relentless rhythm. Nurses moved quickly but silently, aware of the tension in the room, leaving Obina to wrestle with his thoughts. He had trained himself to stay calm, to act decisively, to compartmentalize fear and emotion, but this was different. This was personal. This was family. He felt like he was standing on a knife's edge, balancing the fragile lives of his son, brother, and wife against a secret that could destroy them all if revealed. Obina pressed his hands to his face, breathing in and out, trying to steady his racing heart. He knew he had to remain focused. He couldn't afford to let suspicion override care, couldn't allow doubt to make him hesitate. Yet every moment he looked at Uchenna, every time he saw Chima twitch under sedation, every time he checked Ngozi's weak pulse, he felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. Questions without answers spun in his mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Somewhere outside the ICU, the city moved on unaware, but Obina's world had collapsed into a small, bright room filled with monitors, beeping, blood, and secrets. And he realized that the night was far from over. Every choice he made now, every movement, could uncover truths he might not be able to handle, and protect, or destroy, the family he loved more than anything. The whispers of betrayal had reached him, and he knew there was no going back. Obina had just finished checking the 4 lines and adjusting monitors when his phone buzzed again. The screen showed an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice, cold and emotionless, whispered, "If they wake up, you won't live to see tomorrow." The line went dead before he could respond. His hands went stiff, sweat beading on his forehead. He knew this wasn't an empty threat. Someone out there wanted his family gone, and fast. He glanced out the ICU window and saw the black SUVs circling the hospital like predators, their dark windows hiding faces he would never know but would need to fear. The city outside continued, unaware of the danger lurking right at its edge, but Obina couldn't ignore it. Every second counted. Every movement of the vehicles, every shadow in the street below, made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. His family was not just injured, they were targets. The realization hit him hard. This was no ordinary accident. The car crash, the blood-stained envelope, the whispered warning from Uchenna, everything pointed to a single, terrifying truth: powerful enemies were trying to erase them and bury whatever secrets they held. He thought of Ngozi lying unconscious, Chima struggling with seizures, and Uchenna bleeding quietly in his small bed. Their lives were fragile, and the walls of the hospital might not be enough to keep them safe. Obina's mind raced. He had to act quickly, plan carefully, and protect them at all costs. Every nurse, every doctor, every door in the hospital became part of his strategy. He checked the locks, moved the beds closer together, and kept his eyes on the cameras in the corridors. But he knew it wasn't just about keeping them alive for tonight, it was about making sure no one could reach them until they were strong enough to escape or fight back. The shadows outside felt alive, full of silent menace, and Obina could sense the tension even through the thick glass. He whispered to himself, trying to stay calm, trying to separate fear from action. He couldn't let panic paralyze him. He had trained for emergencies, but nothing in his career had prepared him for enemies who were patient, merciless, and invisible. As the SUVs continued to circle, engines humming quietly in the night, Obina realized the night had become a battlefield. The stakes were higher than ever before. He wasn't just a doctor trying to save lives now, he was a father, a husband, a brother, and a protector against a threat that would stop at nothing. Every heartbeat in the ICU, every shallow breath from his family, was a reminder: failure was not an option. The enemy was out there, hidden in the shadows, and if Obina didn't act with precision, the next sunrise might be the last they would ever see. The first light of dawn began to seep through the hospital windows, pale and trembling, as if even the sun was hesitant to enter the chaos inside. Obinna sat at Uchenna's bedside, his fingers gripping the boy's small hand, feeling the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Every monitor beeped, every alarm a reminder of how fragile their lives still were. Outside, the black SUVs had vanished, but he knew the threat hadn't. They were still out there, watching, waiting for a single mistake. He was running out of time, and the weight of what he had to decide pressed down on him like a mountain. His mind went over every possibility. Staying meant he could try to save Chima and Ngozi, try to patch together the shattered pieces of his family in the ICU. But the moment they woke, the assassins would strike again. His duty as a doctor told him to stay, to protect every life under his care, but his heart screamed that doing so might cost them all. And then there was Uchenna, so small, so fragile, so dependent on him. Smuggling his son to safety might break the rules, betray the hospital, even risk his career, but it might be the only chance the boy had to live. Obinna took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of fear and guilt swirling in his chest. He knew the choice was cruel, unfair, and almost impossible. He could feel the weight of the city pressing down, as if Lagos itself held its breath, waiting to see what he would do. Finally, he nodded to himself, a cold determination settling in his bones. He would save Uchenna first. Whatever came next, he would face it, but he could not allow his son to be taken. With careful, silent movements, he lifted the boy into his arms, avoiding the eyes of the few nurses still working in the ICU. Every step was tense, every heartbeat loud in his ears, and he felt the gravity of what he was doing. The night had ended, but the war was only beginning. Obinna's decision would shake the city, alter the fate of his family, and leave everyone who heard of it gasping for what would come next.